Good morning. Let us get our meeting started. Chairman Cohen, Andy Ward, and Everett Eaton will not be here today. Joe Kelly, Assistant Mayor Kelly, is running a few minutes behind. She'll be here shortly. I know a number of people need to leave right at 9 or before, so let's do our best to move smartly through the agenda if we could, please. Very good. So welcome, everyone, to the, what is today's date? March 3rd meeting of the Economic Development Commission. And if anyone is joining us by Zoom, which I don't think anyone is, we'll just leave that open in case there's some comment. So first order of business, as always, is approval of the meeting minutes from our February 3rd meeting. We have a motion for acceptance.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. Is there any discussion, corrections, or edits? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Good. All right, some working group updates. First is, if you recall from our last EDC meeting, a group appeal, and from our from our retreat, we're going to take a look at our charter and mission and review and recommend some language. Tom, do you want to give an update since you started the draft circulating?
Sure. So the working group associated with this got together, had a long meeting, after which, or as part of which, we decided that we would do two things, or two steps in this process. One was to look at the current ordinance dealing with the EDC and consider whether rewording it in some way would be appropriate. And then second, to after we finish that, to look at creating sort of principles that would guide us as we looked at the issues we face. So, in fact, we did spend some time discussing the ordinance, and a draft, revised draft of that ordinance has been circulated in the subcommittee, but we did not have a chance since that meeting, which was about 2.5 weeks ago, to get back together again. So I anticipate that we will do that between now and the April meeting and have something for you to look at.
Very good. Anyone on the subcommittee, anything to add to that? Very good. Is there any update from the data group? I mean, obviously Phil is not here. Jacob?
I have yet to email Phil, but I imagine we'll meet between this and next meeting and come back something within April, a little more details.
Very good, thank you. And Bob, Land Use Committee Liaison?
Well, I can update you, or Joe Kelly, our Assistant Mayor Joe Kelly, can tell you that we haven't met.
Good job.
We're meeting, usually meet today,
Yes.
but we're meeting next Friday. So next meeting, we should have an update.
Yeah.
Okay, moving right along. Yes,
I will
I'm sorry.
add
Please.
that I did speak with Sean, and we'll be meeting, the BRE subcommittee meeting will be, subcommittee will be meeting probably in a couple weeks to figure out what we're going to do for next year and the next survey and that kind of thing. So it's kind of creeping up on us, I think. We haven't met for a few months.
Yeah, it's true. Very good. All right, update from the Office of
I only
Economic
have 27 bullets, so. First thing, I just want to let this group know, if you haven't heard, since earlier in this year, I've taken responsibility for community development in addition to my economic development responsibilities. If you want to know more about that, I'm still learning, but it's primarily overseeing our efforts to spend CDBG dollars, Community Development Block Grant, and a couple of things that are happening, just to let you know a flavor of it. One is there's some water and sewer improvements for the Woodbury Avenue Cooperative. Anybody know what that is? Yep.
Yeah,
Right.
I saw that sign.
Yeah, so that's was kind of stalled, but it's we've got some dollars appropriated for that. And secondly is also water and sewer lines for the Operation Blessing Warming Center. So a couple of big things that the group here was working to make sure we could spend those dollars that we received from the federal government. So,
What do we have in that fund? You know?
I think it's in the range of
I didn't even know there was much left.
$500,000.
Yeah.
plus
Right,
or
we get
minus.
a yearly
Annual.
allocation.
Yeah.
Oh, we do.
And then we have some ability to spend program income, which is money that gets returned to us. But the challenge with, or the opportunity of CDBG is it has to be spent on identifiably low and moderate income populations.
Okay.
So the challenge is proving that eligibility.
And it gets paid back, doesn't it?
Sometimes it does. Sometimes they're outright grants, sometimes they're loans,
Oh, okay.
which is why we sometimes have program income to deal with.
Is the one on Woodbury Avenue a loan or a grant? You know?
I think it's a grant
I think it's a
to
grant.
subsidize down the amount of the loan they're getting from
Right. 'cause-
Federal Home Loan Bank?
Yes.
No?
Yeah,
Yes.
they have a much larger number, so we're trying to help them with their debt load on that one. Okay. We have the economic forecast next Tuesday morning that was rescheduled from this Tuesday morning. I'll be speaking at that. Thanks, Ben. And as well as Phil, I hope. The regional workforce development effort is close to launch. I have a handout, which I'll leave with you, but I think I've mentioned this, where the regional economic development folks have engaged a marketing firm here in Portsmouth to work with employers and work with them on attracting talent, kind of best practices, developing talent, and retaining talent. And it's really all around workforce. That was the focus, and that's using $20,000 from the New Hampshire Business of Economic Affairs. So they gave us those dollars, and we're going to spend them wisely. The economic development database contract is working its way through City Hall. I'll definitely have an update on that in April. We've got some heavy construction and disruption coming to Commercial Alley and Market Street, starting in mid-April, going through hopefully only mid-May. We had a meeting at Commercial Alley last week. We have a public meeting next week for the Market Street folks. That's next Thursday at 4 o'clock. If you want to know more about that or sit in, feel free. But that's going to be hopefully some positive discussion.
Can I add to that, Sean?
Sure.
It's all the utilities in the area, so it's Eversource, Unitil, Consolidated Communications, Comcast, and us,
Right,
correct?
right. It's really, it's yes.
It's great.
Primarily utility work,
Yeah.
upgrades that need, and then I guess the sewer line that we need to.
That's the us, yeah.
Right, that's the us.
Yeah.
Dig once, get it all done. That's the plan.
How long is that project anticipated to take?
5 weeks is what we're saying, and
5 weeks.
the unknown is the start date. Is that weather-wise or
Right,
organization-wise?
it originally was scheduled for April 17th, but the goal is if we can start on April 10th, we will. Just depends on the weather.
I think the other key to mention, in case people are listening and watching this meeting later, is that there will always be access for residents and businesses. It will always be buttoned up at night, and when we get to the work, for sure in Market Street, the work will stop Friday afternoons and
Right.
stop through the weekend.
Right, no interruption on the weekends. I'm sorry. I've been talking about this, but that's, any other questions about
What's
that?
the scope of that work? Like when we're talking, we're just upgrading all of the utilities in that area, including sewer, all that.
Yeah,
stuff?
there was a press release. It's multiple utilities. I'm not going to be able to recall them, but it's and it's work that, because the question was asked at City Council, did we have to do this? Can we wait? And the answer was we really shouldn't, because some of the things are breaking down. If you look at we had the sinkhole on Market Square, that was on us. And the electricity, really the electric capabilities for Commercial Alley folks. A couple things that are going to happen. A tree is going to go away, and a pole, a pole that holds wires. So it's to get underground, to get everything put back and replace Commercial Alley to its beautiful
So
format.
the utilities will be underground for down Commercial
Yes.
Alley?
Yes.
That's good.
That's good.
Okay. And then Islington Street, I guess the next phase is starting up. I have a meeting on my calendar for that next week as well. So really just trying to be out there side by side with DPW to talk to the businesses and make sure we address their concerns.
Let me jump in on that segment of Islington. It was hoped it would be all the way to the square. It's not. It's from where the project left off, which I believe is Dover Street, through Cornwall, which is the close side of Goodwin Park by Lexi's, give or take.
Okay, and the last update is, let's see. So there's a subgroup has been planned, has been put together to address a cultural plan. If you recall, that's at least 20 years old, our cultural plan. So that's part of the Arts and Nonprofit Committee, and they have a very aggressive timeline to have that done by the end of the year. And I just say that because I am their liaison and trying to help them stand up and get that going. And that will be obviously a nice tool that we want to be aware of from an economic development standpoint. And that cultural plan is intended to inform the master plan, which will be started next year. So I'll have access to that. If you have any questions, just let me know. That's what I have, Alan. I just want to I do want to announce this is my 12th EDC meeting.
You have yet to gnaw through the ropes holding you in place, right?
Right.
Very good. Any other question? Any questions for Sean?
One question, Sean. Is there a potential role for the EDC in this cultural plan, or is
I would think so.
something that just will run parallel with what we're doing?
They're still outlining the scope of work, and I know they're going to. The goal is to engage a consultant. So I would imagine as a stakeholder, we should be. The business community will be involved. I don't know if there's a formal role, but maybe we'll see one that we could address.
But as it goes along, if there is
Yeah.
an opportunity, we should weigh in if we can.
Yeah, there's a reason. There's 3 arts committees that I'm supporting because it's such a big part of our economy and our community. So, but there's some natural connections that I can certainly bring to this group.
Very good. Ben, update from the Chamber Collaborative, please.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Just a few updates from the chamber side of things. As Sean mentioned, the economic outlook was rescheduled from Tuesday due to the weather to next Tuesday. We had to change venues, which is like the 3rd time we've changed venues for this event, but that's okay. So we will be at Great Bay Community College next Tuesday morning, the 7th, from 8:30 to 9:30 in the morning. We'll have Jeff Feingold from New Hampshire Business Review, Sean and Phil here, and who else is joining us?
Ben?
Yes.
Ben from
Well, Ben, yes, a national perspective. Ben from First Citizens Bank, which is the CIT group that is headquartered here in Portsmouth. Also, later this month is the Tourism Summit on the 27th of this month. We'll have an announcement going out to the tourism industry today about that. But the 27th, that's a Monday morning, is our annual gathering of the tourism community. So all our retailers, our attractions, historic sites, hoteliers, restaurateurs, although that's very early in the morning for restaurateurs, so we don't get a lot of them. That'll be at the venue at Port Walk Place. It's a full morning, kind of half day program that we put together for the tourism community to have a little bit of information from how the state's doing their tourism marketing and how we play into that locally and what our efforts are going to be at the chamber. And then you usually do some sort of goal setting and brainstorming at the end of that session. You may want to just keep in mind that we are working very steadily on our traditional spring events. Restaurant Week is coming up April 20th to the 29th. Hit the Decks will be right on the heels of that on May 11th. And then we have, in partnership with the EDC and City, we are putting together an event with the SBA in June, on June 6th. Would it be like a half-day sort of entrepreneur summit, if you will, here in Portsmouth with the regional SBA folks. Too many acronyms this early in the morning.
Bless you.
We also, from the just kind of update on the chamber side of things, I think I mentioned last time that we are in the process of doing some strategic planning ourselves. It's been quite a number of years since we've done that. So we are in the final steps of hiring a consultant to walk us through that process. So that process will hopefully get started here in the next 4 to 6 weeks, and we'll go through the summer and likely wrap up early fall. So we're excited about that, and we're starting to do our fiscal year 2024. Summer to summer is our fiscal year, July to June. So we're starting to do our fiscal year 24 planning now. One thing I did want to mention is at the request of really the mayor, we had a great meeting yesterday with Assistant Mayor Kelly and Sean and several other, Ann was there as well, to have an early discussion, an initial discussion about some sort of retail initiative to try to bring more business to our retail community members. And we're thinking the early part of 2024 and those kind of slower months after Valentine's Day. We've sort of kind of came up with this idea of continue the love of our retailers from after Valentine's Day through end of March. So we're looking at, a 4 or 6 week kind of event where we maybe work with parking on some different things there, and maybe some activities and maybe a festival or two thrown in there to try to bring more people downtown in those kind of slower months for our retailers. So we're just had that one initial meeting yesterday. I think we're all very excited about the opportunity. That's a great partnership with the city and the chamber and the EDC as part of that through the EDC. So we're going to, next steps for that for us, we'll be putting together a survey for our retail community of making sure that, is this the right time of year? What do you think about events? What's worked for you in the past? Get some input from them. And then we'll also share a meeting time for them to come and talk with us about some ideas that we've kind of thrown on the whiteboard at this point. And we certainly want it to be something they're excited about and proud of and something that's going to be effective for them. So that will be the next steps there. So get some input and have an opportunity for them to participate in that process. So that's where that's going. I think the EDC can hopefully be very engaged in that opportunity. I think that's a wonderful partnership that could, in the early stages of developing. So as soon as we know more, I'll be happy to share more on that, and the Assistant Mayor can as well at our upcoming meetings. But I think ball's going down a good path at this point in time. So that's it for me.
Just a quick plug on the Tourism Summit. For those of you who have not attended, it's really a good way to listen to, just sort of the minutiae sometimes of what's going on, not just from the state level, but also, some of the roundtable discussions, about what the individual businesses are going through. So I've always found it very, very helpful. And so if you have a chance to pop in, I think it's really worth attending. It's a good session, usually very well attended.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, Ben. All right, next is our city council update. Over to you, Councilor Lombardi.
Yeah,
Assistant Mayor Kelly.
One of the interesting things, of course, and then Sean alluded to this too, is we've been working on the public art funding, and whereas where public art was not used, for example, at the sewage treatment plant, we've been able to designate those funds to be used elsewhere, things like that. Also, I don't know did everyone get to the thing last night where they announced the sculpture for the Bohenko Gateway Park? It's really beautiful. I don't know if everyone's seen that, but it's really good. We've been continuing to bring staff salaries up to make them competitive, perhaps so we don't lose employees. I think the police department is still struggling with the hiring and keeping I'm losing the name of what they do. It's
Dispatch.
Dispatch, that's it. The dispatchers, which is a pretty important piece. They've been depending on county dispatchers, but that's a step away from Portsmouth and creates actually a little delay in response to that. We're hoping that this can help all that. As well as other areas in the city where people are not really up to speed on their wages. We did increase the elderly and veterans tax credits, as well as the access to them through what their income and resources And that brings us, again, up to speed with something like that, so. We've also, our budget is coming up and our CIP, and we agreed to increase our budget by 4.5% this year to accommodate the inflation and increased needs for money by everybody. So, and then the last thing I'll mention is the community power. We've approved joining the community power group so that it will be a good thing for the city. It'll save a lot of people a lot of money for that. Everyone probably is aware of the outdoor dining and how we've been struggling with that. And I know the assistant mayor is going to talk about that in the next item. And then I guess I would ask the city manager to maybe give an update on McIntyre.
So we are in about the 45-day window. No, we've had, I'm waking up, can you tell? We are in the middle of a 90-day extension with the General Services Administration. We've had 2 check-ins with them at the end of January and the end of February. They understand where we're at in terms of trying to wrestle to the ground the costs of construction or the estimates thereof, and from that to derive a pro forma where we can understand allocation of costs between the city and the developer. So because of the threat of litigation with our development partner, that would explain why things are as managed as they are in terms of messaging. So what we're trying to do is understand where the numbers lie so that we can explain to the public what it is our role might be. So we're getting very close to that. Our deadline for figuring all this out is March 31st, and we had to put a milestone chart together for the GSA, and we are staying on track with regard to that milestone chart that we created. So that's the update I have for now.
Thank you. Any questions for our city council reps or the city manager?
On the power,
Yeah.
I noticed a letter to the editor the other day about the opt-in versus not.
Right.
What is do you know what the situation
The way
is?
it's working is that anyone who is signed up with Eversource for power will automatically be opt-in. They can opt out if they
Right.
want. But that's, I'm not sure why anyone would, because it's going to save them money. But people have that option to do.
What if you already have a third party
If
managing?
you already have a third party, as I do, you will have to opt into it.
I see. Okay.
I would add that we have our final CIP at the March 6th meeting. And so if there's any residents that want to have a say in that or have any questions about that, we will be voting on that on our March 6th meeting. So I think that's important. And I also think it's important to expand on the 4.5% was a motion made by Councillor Tabor. And it's not uncommon for city councils to give kind of a ceiling recommendation to the city manager. So that 4.5 was a guidance or guideline for her and her staff to look at when they're submitting their budgets for the next fiscal year.
If I can just round out that whole thought, the CIP that would be adopted on Monday is really numbers and a plan. They're not dollars yet until the dollars that are rolled in from the CIP to the budget get adopted in June. So it's a way to advance projects and to consider them both in the immediate and longer term. But no money will be allocated as a result of Monday's vote. So you may see there's a possibility to see items in the CIP change between adoption Monday and the ultimate budget adoption in June. It's always worth reminding people that it's not a finite point in time.
Thank you.
So, I had a question. On the power, is that residential and commercial, or is it just?
Yes.
I thought so. I just wanted to confirm that.
And when do you anticipate publishing what the expected rate would be and what the period would be?
Well, it's the coalition. I'm trying to remember.
Speak to that if you'd like.
Okay,
There are
yeah.
some early adopters hitting the market, if you will, in April or thereabouts. We would be on the June track at this rate, and people will know that twice a year rates are set. So if we jump on in the June timeframe, we will enjoy the rates that were set January, February, that run through August. And then in August, everybody who gets power will have a rate reset, so we'll have that conversation again. But I think it'll impact the July bill if we jump in June.
Okay, so that's a little different from some of the third-party contracts that, that are sometimes multiple-year lock-ins.
We think there's some benefit in being a fast follower to the early adopters, the people who jump in April. We'll see what that's like, and we'll be able to message in a way that they've been messaging, and we think it'll be optimal.
Great. Any other questions?
Just a sort of a comment. We used to, well, not used to, it's probably been several years now when we got an update on construction projects within the city and sort of a timeline of what was going on. And I thought that was interesting.
That's great. We could do that.
I can't remember who gave the presentation.
Beverly did that.
Might have been,
Did she? But it would be great to hear from Peter Rice's staff and,
Yeah.
and Dave DeFosis, who everybody knows is the guy on the street for the project. So once we have that mapped out, which should be either now or very soon, that could be an agenda item for sure.
okay, great.
Yeah, that's a great idea. That used to happen, I think, yearly.
Yeah, I don't know if we used to do it yearly. It was
Maybe every other
pre-COVID, like everything.
Yeah, like everything.
You know,
Four times.
The simpler times.
But it's a great thought. Thank you. Any other last comments? Okay, then let's move on.
Yes.
Assistant Mayor Kelly, EDC review of
So
outdoor
I
dining.
threw a zinger out there at our last city council meeting.
Lateral arabesque.
Yes.
Call it.
So, as you all know, and as many people in the community know, we're looking at trying to figure out the long-term ordinance and viability for outdoor dining. And there wasn't, Councillor Cook and Councillor Bagley have kind of been heading up trying to write the policies, write the policy, and there was kind of a little back and forth about fees and things like that. And so I thought it would be a great thing, as we've talked about at a retreat. We were looking for some guidance for some things to touch on and work on from the City Council. So I, during the meeting, recommended that we maybe send this to the EDC as we are good business resident liaison crossover. For us to work on some recommendations for an ordinance. There is no rush on this. The city has adopted an outdoor policy for this season. We went back to last year's policy, except with the amendments of the date. So this year will be May 1, correct? May 1 to Indigenous Peoples Day. And then we based on community feedback, and this was something we were going to go through for this year, any street with high traffic flow where it reverses direction, essentially closing down the street, we will not be doing. But so really, this group has, 9-ish months, 8-ish months to work on some recommendations for a long-term ordinance for us to be presented at council. So we're not working from scratch. We do have a good set of bones to go through, and I'll make sure that policy that we currently use and previous policies that have been currently used or that have been used in the past get sent to this group. So maybe whether we can decide at some point whether we want this to be a working group or we want this to be a all EDC project.
I would add that currently this is operated through a policy, and so I think our goal is to actually move this to an ordinance level so that it becomes a little more comprehensive and withstands, doesn't have to be looked at every year, basically.
Makes sense. Tom and then Jacob.
Your comment, Vince, about being comprehensive raised a question, because when listening to that, or watching that city council meeting, at least one of the counselors, I can't remember whom, mentioned encompassing retail use of the sidewalks as well. So will this be limited to just outdoor dining, or will it be a larger policy dealing with other businesses' use of sidewalks?
So currently, we do have the sidewalk encumbrance policy. So if you are putting a frame out, if you're putting a clothing rack out, there is a policy, but that's definitely something we can look at if we want to build that verbiage into the policy. Obviously, when we talk long term, we do have Market Square master plan coming up and a city master plan, and so I think that I would also voice that this group should very much be part of that as we look at kind of the business impacts of wider sidewalks and maybe pull in parking and things like that. So I would say it's not off the table. It's kind of, but I mean, this group can kind of figure out the scope of recommendations that we would bring forward. But again, I think what has happened when that discussion happens is that there's so many policies that I think sometimes people forget certain policies are already in line, and this will really focus, in my view, to the law on the on-street dining, and because again, we already have some policies. We have a sidewalk cafe policy, so if you are not serving alcohol, we have the sidewalk encumbrance, so just tables outside. There's several different policies that kind of have been patchworked together, or I would hope that we can kind of patchwork together to have one kind of umbrella ordinance, so that again, every year it's not a what falls under what, who falls under this.
Yeah, well, I understand, but I'm just trying to, are you saying basically the EDC can define the scope of its review and recommendations? Or part of the reason I say that is because I think personally the use of parking spaces and not just the encumbrance ordinance that's been in existence since 2012, but, the thing that we've had since 2020, implicates retailers. It's apropos of Ben suggesting we're going to have some type of a retail initiative in this time next year. I just think that if you limit it to outdoor dining, you're kind of missing the larger question is, what do you want to have for a policy as far as allowing businesses to have outdoor economic activity?
I mean, my personal opinion, and I've voiced this the whole time, that is, if a retailer wanted to pay the same price that a restaurant was paying to lease out that parking spot for the season, I would be 100% okay with that. I know that some people I don't think necessarily agree with that. So I guess given the scope, and we can kind of define the scope, I can work with the city manager to define the scope a little bit more, but I would say the scope would be just outdoor dining or outdoor use or use of city or city parking spaces, and we can kind of define that a little bit more.
I would jump in to say if it were the will of the EDC to advise the council on economic activity other than dining, I think that's in the purview of what the council would want to see, because ultimately the EDC won't be making any decisions. It'll be one big set of recommendations. So I think if that were something to add to the set of recommendations, I think that would be germane.
That would be my perspective.
Makes sense.
And we can talk about whether food trucks should be part of that policy as well. That's another conversation.
Let's add 2/3 rails to the
That's a
discussion.
different department.
Jacob, you had a comment?
Council the first part of my question on scope, but also kind of trying to figure out what exactly needs to be answered. So we're going to be giving the provisions here. Are we looking at it from the scope of like, hey, if all the businesses are like, yep, this is good, they made money from it, they profited from it, then, then we should be good? Or are we looking at it from a more holistic approach where we say, oh, well, we take into a lot of things into account, like, community feedback, all this stuff? Are we just looking at it from one point of view because we are the business kind of liaison here? Are we going to the businesses and asking them like, what's this profitable for you? Because from my, point of view, it's like if they had a profitable year, then, it could be a net positive on downtown. So I'm trying to understand like the scope and also like the outcome of those recommendations on provisions.
Yeah, well, I think naturally with this type of program, you're always looking at the holistic overall benefit and impact on the community. One of the things that was very clear is that residents enjoyed and want the continuation of outdoor dining. Again, I view is that kind of this is that we already have policy that has kind of been a moving target and adjusted year to year. And so bringing that policy and figuring out are we covering all our bases? Are we, for me personally, the impact is definitely more looking at the more holistic picture versus whether it was profitable or non-profitable or whether businesses have to do it or not. I think that there's a community desire to keep it, and really part of the adjustments that you'll see from year to year is to look at making it a long-term program, look at making sure it's accessible to everyone, and that means for me mostly patrons, making sure that all patrons have accessibility to outdoor dining in that program, making sure that businesses that decide to opt in on that program, are that it's financially feasible for them, that we're making sure that it, is aesthetically pleasing to some degree, but also making sure that it's not a dramatic hindrance to some of the other businesses. And so I personally view, and I think, as we look through the charter review, that the EDC's role is not just business. It's the balance between resident and business. And so that's why I feel like this was the right forum to send it back to.
So is it accurate to say that coming to the EDC, maybe it's looking at long-term provisions, how to make this feasible going forward, not in like every year we have competition, but every,
Correct.
5,
So,
10 years?
Correct. So the goal is to make an ordinance, and then we don't, it's not something we need to be, that needs to be revisited every single year like a policy.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Ann, then Sarah?
I immediately, my head had this Venn diagram in it, which I think I was showing you, that there's what's the best practices for people who visit downtown, whether it be locals or tourists or people with disabilities, what's best practice for those people, and then there's what's the best practice for the businesses, all the businesses who operate downtown, and then what's the best practice for the city as far as safety, revenue, all of that, and kind of, so that's your holistic
Yes.
look at the whole thing. It's not just what's best for the business's revenue stream. There's three things in play there, and kind of seeing where that intersection is, and that intersection is your policy, as I see it.
Two questions and one recommendation. Is our goal to craft the policy or the ordinance, or give recommendations to be able to craft the policy ordinance to City Council?
Let me touch base with staff and then get back to see what they think is the best route for that and what is traditionally done.
Okay, and then the second point is, we know things take a long time, even though we have like 9 months until next year to figure this out. My recommendation is that if the EDC wants to expand the scope beyond outdoor dining, that we make a decision about that in the May timeframe, and then that gets brought back to the council to make sure that they're on board with our recommendation, so we're not spending our time crafting something beyond what we've been tasked to do. Does that make sense to everybody?
I agree.
Has there been any, sorry, go ahead.
Easiest time to understand how outdoor dining is operating is while outdoor dining is operating. So if we know what we're doing by May when it comes online, it's just so much easier to evaluate.
I just don't want us spending our time making broad recommendations when, no, we were tasked for outdoor dining. So.
Very wise.
Well, that's the reason I asked the question, though,
Yes.
because the discussion at the city council meeting had somebody suggesting we needed to have a larger view of the issue, but
And I don't mind spending time there, I just don't want to spend it if it's not asked for.
Yeah.
I just had a question about the policy toward encroaching on city streets. I think you mentioned two-way versus one-way. So two-way is, you're not allowed? Is
Yeah.
that it? And
So-
one-way you are?
If
pass it.
the dining request reverses or detours traffic from the current traffic pattern, it will not be allowed.
So Fleet Street.
Which
So
is-
Fleet Street, Pleasant Street,
Okay, right.
so
Yeah.
Which is different.
But
from
what
last year.
about,
Different than Congress? I mean, does Congress?
what about Congress? I
Different
was
from
thinking more of that,
Didn't change
you know.
direction.
Didn't change direction,
Right.
just changed lanes.
Can I ask what the reasoning for that is? Because there seems to only be 2 instances of that.
there are. And we
So-
can talk about them. Let's talk about
Yeah,
them.
I'd li-
Franklin
I'd-
and Clipper.
Clipper Tavern.
Right. So in both instances, businesses in both sections were impacted, and traffic, people drove the wrong way, and people did
A lot.
bad vehicular behavior. So but as Ann, I think you pointed out earlier this week, people are still being dopey about Pleasant Street, but
Yes, they are.
we don't need to encourage
Last
more
week.
bad behavior. So the traffic flow is the way it is for safety reasons and for circulation, so it further exacerbates both those issues. So that's why those two would not happen again this year.
And in the first 2 years, it was allowed, and then this year, that's the difference for the policy.
This
right?
coming year.
This coming year.
Correct. And if Eric Eby, our transportation engineer, were here, he'd be a lot more articulate, but I think I hit the broad points.
It comes down to safety,
Yeah,
essentially. Okay.
exactly.
I was thinking too about Congress Street and what, you know, it goes from 3 lanes down to 2 in the summer because you've got restaurants encroaching on the road. I was just wondering what the long-term plan for that is.
That will be wrapped into that Market Square revisioning.
Would that be to ultimately only have 2 lanes there?
Or at least study it
Wider
and see what that
sidewalks.
does to backing up the traffic and the
Yeah.
flow, right?
Okay.
But I think it was Councilor Lombardi who asked for, in the period where you're not doing outdoor dining, can you stripe it, or can you effectually use that left lane as a shoulder, or so to speak? We're talking about that internally now, and Eric Eby doesn't seem to think it's problematic that when outdoor dining in Congress Street is realized and set up, that the stretch from Chestnut to the first outdoor dining, if it's flatbreads or goat, whoever, that could be temporary loading zone, pickup, drop-off, sort of formalizing what people are doing now anyway.
And I would say those retailers there, this was also partly a request from them. They wrote in and said in that strip, really enjoyed outdoor dining. It brought more foot traffic to them, and that they unofficially were able to use that as a quick loading, almost
Right.
definitely loading.
Flatbread.
Yes, but definitely a 15-minute pickup, drop-off location.
On that
So
side of the street, because your
Yeah.
sidewalks are so narrow that
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm sure they don't get as much
Yeah,
traffic.
and as we know, that conversion there, the staggered stop signs, there's always people not knowing where, and then, we merge from 2 lanes to almost 1 lane if you are, next to the Anthony M and there's a bus loading and people crossing, and then we go into 3 lanes, and so definitely getting a little bit clearer striping. I think one of the big factors for last year for the somewhat frustration at that intersection was also the change of the intersection. We during COVID lost the diagonal crosswalks, and we have delayed signals, and so I think the combination, which are actually safer if you look at studies. I know some people don't necessarily agree with that, but the studies do show that they are more effective in lowering pedestrian and vehicle collisions. But so I think there were a combination of people getting used to not being able to turn whenever they wanted, having to delay with the pedestrians, and the combination of outdoor dining. So I think, after a couple seasons, hopefully this season, people will be more used to that traffic pattern.
Couldn't you use the same argument for one-way streets, though? After a few seasons, people just understand not to go down those one-way streets?
I think the difference is the businesses, we're very vocal. I also think
Gillies about it.
Gillies.
I also
I
think
remember
that
the letters, yeah.
I think if you
People try to turn right down Daniel Street, and it's been one way forever.
yes,
I was watching the turning from Market Square down Pleasant.
I sit
week.
in the window at Cup of Joe all the day and watch people try to go the wrong way down Ladd Street, and I'm constantly yelling, "Stop! Stop!" I also think with some of these businesses, Clipper, we have neighbor abutter permissions, and so I know that they went into that abutter space, and that abutter is now under construction. And so I think, there's several things to think about.
So the other side of that street is parking. So if there was a restaurant on that side of the street, they could set up in the parking spaces, and that would be fine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. If
Louis.
Clipper wanted to apply for that, I mean, that is at,
It's got to be contiguous. doesn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know how you'd cross.
I don't know how you,
Across the street.
yeah.
From an alcohol
Yeah.
standpoint, though.
Yeah.
If Clipper wanted to move into
Into
Louis'
Louis',
space,
yes.
they would solve their problem.
Yes.
That space has been empty for years, though.
Can I reiterate an unpopular saying that that I latched on to? Beverly Mason, our former planning director, said, if people have come to rely on space that isn't theirs for their business model, they might need a different space. Point blank. There are winners and losers in the real estate world.
Yep.
There are people who benefit greatly from where their restaurant is located, and there are others for whom that is not always the case. So that sounds callous, but
It's a fair point, Bill.
and I don't know that it's the city's responsibility to play a role in that if it's not a safe and
Generally, you pay
appropriate.
less for a space that, didn't have the amenities.
I think it's fair. I'm just trying to get a general idea of what people are downtown, because I walk past that all the time.
I have a question of the scope of this policy. Is it a citywide policy or is it an urban core policy? And I ask the question because I've always wondered why the restaurants on Islington Street, for instance, haven't requested use of the parking spaces in front of their operation.
I mean, I think a lot of besides Islington Street, I think a lot of the places outside of downtown have outdoor dining, have access or are on private lots. I think, Mojo's is a good example. They're on a private lot.
Roundabout.
Lexi's is on a private lot. They have
Cafe
Espresso.
permit.
Cafe Espresso got a permit to use in the Islington Street Plaza. They got a 900 Plaza. They got a permit.
I'd say it's citywide, and I think we'd have to think carefully about whether the policy we create is beneficial citywide versus just downtown.
That's a really good question.
But I think a place like Cafe Killam, which has very little seating inside, but has 2 parking spaces right out in front of it, and I just...
I
They don't ask.
They'd be cutting off their nose to
Better off
spite their
having-
face.
I was going to say, as someone who lived directly above Cafe Killam for a couple years, I would get that buzzer at 6:15 if my car was in the 15-minute spot. So I think he likes the turnover.
Makes sense. Sean, you had a comment?
No, thank you, Alan.
Just one more question about the dining. What about the place on Bridge Street?
Bridge Street, Beach Street.
Dwyer's.
Bridge Street, Dwyer's.
The 1,000-car rule?
It's a 1,000-car rule. So that's one of the situations we look, Councillor Cook and Councillor Bagley and the council as a whole looked at, and we, Councillor Cook and Councillor Bagley did with city staff, a car count. So they said if it was under 1,000 cars. And I also know that I believe the owner of Dwyer's did a petition essentially of the neighborhood and got full support. I think a lot of the neighbors actually like it because it prevents people from speeding up the street.
Is that two-way flow?
One way.
Was one.
Is that the only restaurant that benefits from that 1,000-car policy?
Correct.
Correct.
That has expressed or has experienced outdoor dining. Yep.
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
I'm supportive of that.
So a lot of questions on this. How do we settle on what it is we're going to focus on? Do we have this as the agenda, as a shared agenda item for the next meeting? Do we need a working group? We could talk about this
Actually,
for a
my
year.
question, how are we
Yes.
going to approach this?
Yes.
I was basically going to say, what you see here right now is why we are asking for help of
Yes.
this
And I
group.
want to make sure we've been given this referral.
Right.
How do we help? I don't want to just
Yeah.
talk about it.
So
I think that's good.
why don't I work with city staff to kind of scope it, and maybe there is different policies that we are looking at giving recommendations on. And then I'll bring that back at the next meeting, and we can decide then if we want to do this as a full EDC or if we want to do a working group. Does that?
That makes sense.
I think that'd be helpful.
And I threw this as a last minute zinger because if you watch the meeting, there was going to be, I felt, kind of no resolve out of what was happening, and again there were a lot of things being piled on, which was a lot of friendly amendments, a lot of things, and so I said, let's pause this, let's adopt the policy that we did have with some of the changes that we wanted to implement for this season, and let's bring it to the EDC to.
Yeah, I'll just say I think I agree with Sarah. For the sake of the group, let's be clear what we're
Yeah.
being asked to provide so that we can provide it, because we don't want to miss the mark or add to any confusion or, quite honestly, drop the ball that we've
Yeah.
just been given. So the clearer we can be on the scope and any intersection with other policies, I think the group is up for it, but to Sarah's point, let's be clear on the ask so we can be clear on the delivery.
Whether it's a working group or the group as a whole, the city resources that I'm thinking about to provide as resources would be from legal, public works, and planning, along with Sean and me.
Excellent. Well, if any group can do it, it's this commission, so I have a lot of faith in that. Any last comment? Yes, Ben, go ahead.
I was just going to ask that perhaps in next month's packet, if we could share some of the language that exists already, policies and ordinances that or whatever that exists for the sidewalk encumbrances and some of the stuff that's a little further afield than just the outdoor dining. I think that would be very helpful to have an informed discussion.
Would it be possible, Karen, to have somebody do a quick 2-page summary of the history of this thing?
Yes. We actually have the benefit of the report, so we'll circulate that as well.
A summary. Yeah.
What I'm talking about
The
is
evolution of.
the evolution that
We can do that.
the council has fought with,
We'll
starting with
figure
the
that out.
2012 policy, and then,
Yeah.
I'm somewhat familiar with it, but
Mm-hmm.
there's all sorts of stuff I missed because I.
Sure.
3 years of history.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
I'm just trying to keep us from spending a lot of time going over past stuff.
Yep. Good idea.
Very good. Any other thoughts or comments on that?
I just want to say that I think there's already a great amount of data and information that the city has acquired. I don't think this is going to involve like going out and doing surveys and all that work has been done. All that data exists, so seems like all the tools are there to do what needs to be done. So I know to Sarah's point earlier that 9 months is not really 9 months anymore, and it's more like 3. So I think but I love the direction we're going with this.
Agreed. Any other comments or thoughts? Well, oddly, at 8:25, we are at the public comment portion of our
We
program.
lost our public
We
commenter.
lost our public commentator.
Drag that out just one.
All right. And I don't believe there's anybody on Zoom for public comment.
There is not.
Okay. Our next meeting is scheduled for April 7th, next month.
I need to confirm that the building is open because it's Good Friday. So we'll circulate a confirmation of the date or suggestion of
That's right, we might
alternates.
need to- That's a good point. For those of you who are Good Friday inclined. Okay, is there any other commentary, any other business that we'd like to put forth?
I move to adjourn.
Do we have a
Second.
second? All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you all for an efficient meeting.